Welcome to Mr. Screenright. Today I'm making a book Nook from Indiana Jones. Actually, this is made for my DVD shelf, so it's more of a cinema cranny. I don't know, we'll go with it for now. So I'm starting by measuring out the XPS foam to fit on my shelf. This is going to be the base, walls, and ceiling of my cave scene. When cutting it out, make sure you push hard enough that you bend your brand new saw, okay? Okay. Now, with the magic of editing, I'm going to jump ahead a little. I'm building the famous scene from the Indiana Jones stunt show at Disney World where Indy runs away from a boulder. I think it's also from a movie or something. While pink and foamy right now, these walls and floor will, like a man choosing the wrong Grail cup, transform before your eyes into something a lot more weathered. Now, this is one of my favorite techniques. It's called using squished foil to squish texture into foam. I think it looks neat, so I'm also going to cover it up with this professional modeling paste. And professionals don't leave streaks, so they dab their model paste on their foam with a paper towel to make it look more natural. While that dries, let's meet the star of our diorama. He doesn't look like much. He just looks like he's seen some stuff. Just a little bit off the top here, and not too bad. I mean, it could be worse. Basically, I'm mutilating this model train figure to get him into the perfect running pose, because the boulder's going to be chasing him, remember? But don't tell him that, he's been through enough. Even with superglue, getting his limbs into just the right spot is tricky. I'm using firm Super Sculpey to mold some of the defining details of Indiana Jones, like his hat, whip, shoulder bag. The hat took me a few tries to get right. Luckily, the whip was a lot easier. Just roll some clay until it looks like a snake. Then I baked them for about 15 minutes and painted them all a nice brown. He's already starting to look just like Indiana Jones, don't you think? I'm covering our Indy with some Mod Podge mixed with gray paint. This worked pretty well to give the paint a surface to stick to, and it made the figure a little sturdier. Then let's give that little guy a break while we start working on Indiana Jones' biggest enemy, a ball of foil. Okay, actually, I'm going to roll out some more Super Sculpey and cover the foil with it. This makes the clay bake faster. After it's covered and I roll it around, I use some more foil to give it a rock texture, like I did with the foam. Then I give it a pretty good coat of isopropyl alcohol. That gets rid of all the fingerprints. I think it's looking like a pretty great boulder. And now the tried and true black paint and Mod Podge. I'm not scientific about this, I guesstimate, which is actually a word in the dictionary. After a good stir that was in no way sped up by editing, it's time to coat all the sides of our book Nook, cinema cranny, movie niche? No, I'm not just Googling synonyms of Nook. Anyway, we coat everything in the Mod Podge, and this gives it a nice base coat that we're going to layer paint on later. But first, I'm going to use scraps of foam to shape the slope the boulder rolls down out of that hole in the wall. Like, what would you call that? Like a nook, maybe? Oh no, can't start that again. As I place these pieces, I'm just using what looks good and shaping it as best I can. I'll add these bits to the floor and then to the ceiling. Some of them are stalagmites and some are stalactites, but I don't know which is which. What do I look like, a nerd? Don't answer that. So now I'm moving on to painting Indiana Jones, and I never use anything fancier than acrylic paints you can buy at craft stores, usually for less than $1 each. And after all those attempts earlier to get his arm in the right spot, I finally got Indy to hold on to the golden idol from this scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Of course, it's just a small rock glued into the crook of his arm, and then I painted it gold, because at this scale, the suggestion of details is more important, I think, than actually nailing all the details. Which is why Indy also has no eyes or mouth. All I ended up doing was dry brushing some scruff onto his face, or as I like to call it, dry scruffing. That's a word I just made up that's not in the dictionary. Then I gave the whole figure a dry brush of brown to give him that authentic, lived-in charm. And with all the accessories in place, I think this Indiana Jones has come together pretty great. Like, this is way better than I was expecting when I started. I'm just really in love with this Indiana Jones figure now. Anyway. Now it's time to finish up his better half. This black wash is watered down acrylic paint. It gets into all the cracks to really bring out the details of this boulder. And then off camera, I dry brushed to add some more weathering. And I think it's time for a test drive. Let's see if Indy approves. Awesome, we're good to go. So now you need to find your Kroger brand chili powder, which became taco mix, so that you can make vines for the cave. And it goes without saying, but only this brand works. This is actually twine that I painted green and threw into a blender to make grass for a project. I'm going to give them a brown wash and then let them dry. Kroger really knows how to make appetizing seasoning, don't you think? I'm going to let the music carry you through my montage of dry brushing. But first, I'm always amazed at how just a tiny bit of paint on a brush can end up making such a huge difference, because I just love how this cave turned out. Now that the vines are dry, it's time to make this cave overgrown. I'm using tacky glue and really just eyeballing where I place them. I'm looking for seams that could be covered up, but I don't want to overdo it. And even without the walls and ceiling assembled, I think you can see what a difference here paint and these vines have made to the whole scene. To assemble it, I put toothpicks inside of the walls or the ceiling so that each connection had a little more support, and it helped it stay put while the tacky glue dried. But I mean, it's not an Indiana Jones cave without some spears hidden inside the walls anyway, right? Somewhere along the way, I was trying to decide how I was going to hide the ugly sides of this project. I mean, it was going on a shelf, so I suppose the DVDs on either side could have done that for me. But I was wishing I could think of some sort of case to go around my diorama. Something from Indiana Jones that was kind of like a box. And that's when inspiration struck. Obviously, the crate from the end of the movie. So, I really am like Indiana Jones. I'm making this up as I go. I created a template for the numbers and symbol that's spray painted onto the crate in the movie. I just used Word to do it and gathered images from online to help. After I printed that out, I used some graphite transfer paper to trace everything onto the wood. Basically, you draw on top of this paper and then it transfers pencil-like markings onto the surface. And so then I just followed up with another pass using a dark pen. Nothing fancy, but the results ended up looking pretty accurate, I think. So now the scene was pretty much complete, but I kept looking at the front thinking it needed something to tie it all together and cover up some of these seams in the foam. And then out of nowhere, I got some inspiration for some designs I could add to the front of it. I don't know where it came from. So I broke out the Sculpey clay again and created some stone sculpture facades for the front sides of my movie shelf diorama that others might call a book nook. At this point, I was getting anxious to finish the thing, so my sculpting was a little slapdash, but with layers of paint and dry brushing and some black wash, I think it ended up tying everything together a little better than I had it before. I drilled a hole and used some metal tubing to secure the boulder into place with super glue. I perched it right at the edge of the tunnel just to give it a little more dynamic feel. And then the final touch is putting Indy himself into place. Nothing is knocking that guy over now. Let's move on to the final glamour shots, why don't we? Raiders of the Lost Ark is my favorite movie of all time, so I was excited that this was my first project on the channel, and I love how it turned out. I might even say it belongs in a museum. And some friends of mine agreed with me, and they asked if they could store it for safekeeping. I said yes, and I just hope they don't lose track of it. Thank you for watching. This is just the first of many videos about the stories I love and the crafts I make to celebrate them. I have some projects already lined up. If you want to see me make anything, drop a comment below or tell me your favorite Indiana Jones moment. Consider subscribing before you leave, and until next time, this is Mr. Screenright.